off because there are lots of questions. And so welcome to our very first Crayon Conversations, where we chat to guest experts about the financial impact of parenthood. I'm thrilled to introduce Logan Whitelaw today. Logan is a father of two, and he's also the co-founder of Kindello, the largest childcare marketplace in New Zealand. Kindello makes finding your perfect daycare option easier and quicker by showing you all of your choices in the one place. Prior to Kindello, Logan was the co-founder of Establish, one of the most active development consultancies in the New Zealand early childhood education sector. So suffice to say, Logan knows a lot about childcare. We've had a number of questions submitted beforehand, which I will go to in the Q&A, but this is a small group, so if you've got questions as we go, feel free to unmute and ask them on the way, particularly if they're clarifying questions. So, Logan, let's kick into it. Oh, and also just to let everyone know, we are recording the session for the folks who can't make it. So Logan, tell us, how was Kindello born? What was the origin of your startup?
Kia ora, thanks, Stephanie. Look, as you said, Steph, I was working in the early learning sector, helping people set up some amazing daycares right across the country. One of them is behind us that we worked on. So I ended up working on about 250 brand new centres or conversions over the time, and got to know the sector really well, got to know the owners really well, and heard a lot about their problems. And then at the same time, we had a young family ourselves, so had our first boy, Max, and realised that my wife and I, when we were looking at early learning, that we understood the sector, but we actually didn't know around us what were the best early learning options for Max. And actually found it hard to decide what type of service, whether it's play centre, kindergarten or daycare. Found it hard to understand what the best services around were. There were no reviews by real parents, really sort of fragmented experience. And it became this stressful experience filled with a bit of guilt about, are we doing the right thing by, our son, putting him into early learning, this young. And I thought, hey, hold on, if we're feeling like this, what's it like for all the other parents out there who are actually not involved in the ECE sector? And talked to our friends, and our friends were all feeling exactly the same way. So we thought, hey, there must be a better way that we can go and help people find the best childcare for them. So we came up with this concept of Kindello, the marketplace where you can see all of your centre options, all of your home-based options in one place, filter by the things that might matter to you, whether that's, hey, I need full day care, or I need care for an under two, or I want meals provided. Then allow you to read real reviews by real parents, and then instantly connect with services, with inquiries, with direct chat, with the ability to book visits instantly as well. So that was the concept. That's that's what we thought needed to exist. And about a year ago, we really kicked into it, built a bit of a team around us, and got this thing up and running. So look, we saw a problem, we wanted to change it. We jumped in, boots and all, and here we are.
That's super cool. When I started looking for childcare for my older daughter, Louisa, she's 3.5 now, but I remember being so overwhelmed by just the sheer number of options out there. And you've already mentioned some: kindergarten, play centre, daycare. Can you kind of run us through what are the options out there, and run down, in practice, what's the difference between them?
Yeah, cool. So look, there's a few options out there, and actually on the Kindello blog, you'll find some more detailed descriptions about all of them as well. So feel free afterwards to go and check that out and read some more detail. But I'd probably start by saying there's two groups that we can then break down a little bit further. So we would say we've got centre-based childcare sitting here, and then we've got the home-based or at-home childcare sitting across here. So starting within centre-based, we've got a few different types, or what they would call service types, if you're the Ministry of Education. Let's start with, let's just run through them real quick. So on centre-based, we've got play centre, we've got kohanga reo, we've got kindergarten, and then education and care, which most people would call daycare, childcare, those sort of words. Then on the home-based or at-home side of things, we've got home-based network, which is people like Pause, Tiny Nation, Kids at Home, etc. Then we've got nannies, and then we've got au pairs, and we'll discuss all of these in a bit more detail. But starting with Play Centre, if you've never been to Play Centre before, it's a different concept than the rest of them. So Play Centre is all about being parent-led. That means there's a lot of involvement from parents. So they will have a building or sometimes work out a shared space with another organisation. They're led by parents, so you get super involved. So it's probably not a great option if you are working full-time or working a lot. It's going to be very hard for you. The cool thing about Play Centre is it creates this community feel where you've got a whole bunch of parents who are coming in, sharing the learning experience with their children, meeting other families. So that's really cool. There's a very small cost compared to other service types. And there's also this ongoing need to help. So think about, you've got these buildings that need to be maintained. So there's often working bees on weekends that you're going to go to. You're going to be helping mowing the lawn. You're going to be helping painting buildings, etc. So it can be really, really cool. But if you're a really busy working parent, it might not be the best option for you. We started at Play Centre as our first early learning experience. And I'll share some more about that a bit later on. Another service type is Kohanga Reo, which is a full immersion te reo service. It's also parent-led, so run by whānau. It can be very low cost, and it's got this parent involvement side of things as well. So once again, it's similar to Play Centre in terms of you can expect to be heavily involved in it. But specifically, if you want your child to be raised in a full immersion te reo experience, if you want to have a bilingual household and it's really important to you, then Kohanga Reo is going to be a really good choice for you. Then we'll move on to kindergarten. So the difference with kindergarten compared to a daycare or a childcare service is that they are staffed 100% by qualified teachers. So if that's really important to you, that everyone who is looking after, who is educating your child is 100% qualified, then kindergarten is a really good option. They typically only provide for children aged 2 and over. So if you have an under 2, chances are kindergarten isn't going to be right for you yet. They tend to be part of a larger kindergarten association, which helps them maintain quality, helps them share resources, etc. So if you're in Auckland, the big one up here is the Auckland Kindergarten Association. There's also Counties Manukau Kindergarten Association. Kindergartens often run shorter days. So it could be that they're operating from, let's say, 8:30 to 2:30 or 3 o'clock. Some of them run sessions as well. So they might have a morning session and then an afternoon session where different children come in. More and more, though, we're seeing that as parents are going back to work earlier, as parents are working longer hours, as children are spending more hours in the early learning environments, that these kindergartens are extending their hours out now as well. So you'll find that newer kindergartens are running some longer hours. Another really cool thing about kindergarten is it can be lower cost compared to a daycare or childcare centre. But once again, you just need to check that, when you start to inquire with them. The last one that we'll talk about in the centre-based services are the education and care centres. So that's daycares, childcares, etc. So they can either be community owned, privately owned, or they could be a not-for-profit. There's about 2,500 different education and care centres in New Zealand, and all of them are licensed by the Ministry of Education, same as Kohanga Reo Kindergarten Play Centre. They're all licensed. So to operate a daycare centre, you need to have 50% of your teachers being fully qualified, but most centres in New Zealand are running 80% of their teachers being qualified because they get a higher level of funding from the government if they do that. Centres can set their own fees, so therefore these fees range wildly across the country. So you can have centres that are entirely free, cost you nothing at all, through to centres that are costing well over $100 per day. And it just depends on where you are, whereabouts in the country you are, what those services offer will dictate what you're paying. So education and care really suits families that are needing longer care hours. Many centres are opening at 7 in the morning, can close at 6 or later at night. So that means if you have to be at work at a certain time, it might suit you. Most children in the early learning sector in New Zealand are sitting within this education and care type offering. Moving on to these home-based settings. So the first one that sits at this sort of at-home care is what we'd say like a home-based network. So this is, pause, this is Tiny Nation, homegrown kids. In these settings, there will be one educator who will care for children from their home, and they'll look after a maximum of 4 children at any one time. Within that 4 children number, you're allowed to have a maximum of 2 children under 2. So no more than 4 ever, but no more than 2 children under 2. The educator does not have to be qualified in terms of being a qualified teacher, but there's always a visiting teacher who will go and oversee around about 10 educators in their home. So that's just to help check for quality of education, providing resources, making sure there's consistency of care across the network, and just making sure everything's safe. The really cool thing about home-based is that if you are nervous about enrolling your child in a centre-based service because of, hey, I'm worried about them getting sick with COVID, I'm worried about all the time that they'll be off sick with, the general sort of runny nose that kids get at ECE, or my child doesn't do that well with big groups at the moment, or I really want this home-based environment, that's where home-based education really comes in. So it's a really cool option that you've got out there as well. The next one in this sort of at-home care is nannies. And I won't go into too much details on nannies. That's a whole other thing. But basically, a nanny will work from your home. They're not part of the New Zealand early learning curriculum, Te Whariki. That means that you can't guarantee you're going to get the same sort of educational results or the same input that these other licensed services have to meet. But a nanny might make a lot of sense for you if you have, let's say, 2, 3, 4 children. You're working hours outside the norm that don't fit with traditional early learning, might be good for you. There's a lot of nanny agencies in New Zealand. So just to find a nanny, basically look at those agencies and ask questions there. And then au pairs is this the other concept, and that's tends to be foreign exchange type students who will come over here. They will live with you at your place. You need to treat them like a family member, need a place for them to stay, and in exchange for that and payment, they live with you, care for your child or children. It's a really cool sort of concept, but COVID has really stalled this option in the last couple of years, and it hasn't come back fully yet. So on Kindello, our platform, you'll find every centre-based option in the country. So you'll be able to look at any different type in terms of play centre, kohangareo, kindergarten, daycare, see all the different types there. And we've just added home-based recently. So I think there's about 400 home-based services on there, more added each week. So yeah, if you want to know more about those service types as well, jump onto Kindello. We've got a blog there that goes into far more detail about that. So sorry, Steph, that was a bit of took a bit of time, but yeah, there's quite a few options to choose from.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive overview, and I think it is helpful to go into that detail about who it would suit and why you might pick one option over another. So you touched on cost briefly when talking about some of those options. Can you give us? It sounds like there's a range, but for parents to be on the call, what are they looking at paying roughly for each of those options? Or at least a range, just so folks can kind of, at least from a financial standpoint, start to understand what might be suitable for them.
Yeah, cool. So like you say, there's so much variation between, and as always, you want to talk to specific services that you want to be visiting to understand their cost. But generically, I would say that starting at the lower end in terms of cost for a parent, play centre and kohanga are usually going to be the least. So conversely, they're going to cost you less in terms of dollars. They're going to cost you more in terms of personal time invested in that service for upkeep, involvement, etc. as well. So play centre.
Hourly rate, is there an average hourly rate, Logan, or how does it usually work with those centres?
So I wouldn't get attached to an hourly rate for it because it varies so greatly across the country. Okay. Play centre, I think, sort of structures it as a donation that you provide, and it's going to be in the sort of range of, you know, dollars per day. Like, it's not going to be, we're not talking 50, like, you know, we're talking minimal dollars, $1 or $2 per day type thing. Kohanga reo, similar sort of thing as well. So basically putting those ones down is almost free. Then I'd step into the next level would be kindergarten. And once again, kindergarten costs can range wildly across the country. But kindergarten tends to be, it might be $2 to $4 per hour that you're there, depending on where in the country you are as well. And there's some subsidies that we'll talk about a little bit later on as well that are worth touching on that reduce some of these costs. Then after kindergarten, so we've got play centre, kohanga reo, kindergarten. Then you start to get into the education and care services and home-based. When we're talking education and care, there are some free services out there. So the not-for-profits, the community centres can be entirely free, all the way through to some of the education and care centres in Auckland are greater than $100 a day, easily greater than $100 a day. Home-based as well depends entirely on which home-based provider you go with, but it sits in that same sort of cost range as education and care. So more expensive than kindergarten, less though than the sort of ultimate higher cost, which is the nannies. And nannies are usually at the higher end of the scale, but can make sense if you have multiple children in your family. It starts to make sense that way.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
What I would say though, Steph, is if in your research and looking for the right centre or the right service for your child, if you find somewhere that you love, so for example, if you like the centre behind me, then you go, oh, it's beautiful, this is going to be the perfect place for my child, and you find out the cost is a little too much for you and doesn't quite fit your budget, make sure you just tell them though that you absolutely love this centre. It's going to, you know, I feel like it's going to be the right place for you and your family, but it's slightly out your budget. Often they'll want to increase their occupancy, because remembering that a lot of their funding comes from the government, not just from you. So they might be able to reduce the price for you for a period of time, or reduce it generally for you to get you in the door. So I would say whatever the list price is, or whatever the price they tell you, if you can't afford that, tell them that you'd love to be there and see what they can do for you. It's worth asking. Okay,
that's a good tip. wouldn't have thought to raise that. So let's talk about some other costs. What are some hidden costs, or things that catch particularly first-time parents unaware when it comes to these different options?
Yeah, sure. Look, there can be some hidden costs, and it's stuff that you only learn once you've been, once you've enrolled in a childcare centre, and you're like, oh man, I wish I knew that. But one of the typical ones is the old Mondays and Fridays. When you first enroll your child into ECE, you'll be amazed at how many Mondays or Fridays you don't end up taking your child to a service, but still end up paying for. So for example, if during the year, you go and take a few long weekends, maybe you go down, go stay somewhere, go to Taupo for the weekend, and you take a Monday or Friday off, then you will still be paying your childcare service for the day that you're away, because it's not a specified public holiday. So you'll find that it's the Mondays and Fridays that always end up that way. So if you're looking at enrolling your child for 2 or 3 days a week, look, maybe Tuesday to Thursday is going to be your best days. We found that we took a whole bunch of Mondays off and ended up paying for it. So that's just one of the little things. And look, everyone in the office, we all joke about the same sort of thing as well, that, Mondays are the kind of tends to be the worst days in terms of paying for something you're not using. Probably something else to think about is asking the childcare services that you're looking at about their policy on holidays. So for example, if you decide that, hey, you want to get out of New Zealand for a week, you want to go to Fiji, see some sun, take the kids over, have a really cool family holiday, you will likely end up paying full childcare fees for the week that you're away, unless your ECU service has some sort of policy to say they allow you to take a week off per year or allow a certain amount of days off per year without charging you. So it pays to ask, when you're looking at these services, what their policy is around you taking a week off, because it can make that trip to Fiji even more expensive. Another sort of hidden fee that people generally don't know about is a waitlist fee. So you'll find that some of the really amazing childcare centres have quite a long waitlist. It might be 3 months, 6 months, a year, some are greater than a year. And these services often won't let you join a waitlist and just put your name down without any commitment. They want to know how many days a week will you be attending once you get an enrolled space opened up, and they'll want you to pay a deposit to hold that space. Now, typically, they're asking people to pay a week fee, sometimes asking to pay a month's fee as a deposit to go on that waitlist. When you get enrolled at that service, that obviously gets credited, and so you're not double paying for that week or the month. But if you're looking to go on a few waitlists because you're really keen to get into somewhere quickly, think about the initial outlay that you're going to have to pay, and think about some of those deposits that you're essentially sacrificing if you enroll somewhere else. So it's just this hidden cost that can be quite frustrating upfront. So really, when you visit a centre, when you're inquiring online with us about them, ask about whether they have a waitlist fee, if they have a waitlist. What are some other costs? Look, some centres provide optional activities. So some centres will take children swimming to the local swimming pool. Some will do yoga classes or do like a mini ball type thing as well. And often those optional activities will have an added cost to it. So once again, worth asking when you do a visit to a centre about if they have optional activities, if there's any additional costs on those ones. Probably the last thing I'd say on hidden costs would be, if you are looking at a not-for-profit community play centre kohanga service, there will often be a fundraising requirement. So for you to help fundraise with them to get funds into the organisation. So it could be that you're going to be having to buy raffle tickets. It could be you're going to have to sell raffle tickets, doing sausage sizzles, whatever it is. So just thinking about that as well. So yeah, so I think those are probably the most common hidden costs that we'd see.
Yeah, and I think the other ones I found as I was looking is a commitment to minimum hours. So you need to do at least 20 hours a week with them or something like that. And then I know some centres, you mentioned earlier, you can provide lunch or they do the nappies, but sometimes you have to pay a bit extra for that as well.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and look, that probably feeds into as well. It's not so much a hidden cost, but an expectation that when you're looking to enrol in some of these centres, they will typically want you to be there 3 days a week as a minimum. They typically don't want children coming in for just 1 day a week. It's about settling, and it's about getting a child settled. Also for a centre, it's hard if you've got a child coming in 1 or 2 days a week and then filling those spaces the other days of the week as well. So you'll find that you're probably always guided to go 3 days a week or greater when you first start a service.
Yeah. And the last question for me before we turn to some of the audience questions is, what financial support is available for the government? Because childcare is expensive. And in fact, I think New Zealand is one of the most expensive developed countries in the world in terms of childcare. So what's there to help parents through this financially?
Cool. So look, there's two main types of subsidies in New Zealand provided by the government. So the first one is called the 20 hours ECE subsidy. And that applies to everyone who is a child between the age of 3 and 5 years old. The second one is called the childcare subsidy, and that's an income threshold subsidy. So look, I'll go into a little bit of detail on each of these. There are some complexities. So after this, Steph, I'm happy to share the link to the blogs on Kindello, which go into like quite a bit of detail about these, and have a little calculator as well to help people through it. But I'll just cover off sort of generically what these two types are. So the first one is the 20 hours ECE subsidy. The idea is that all children in New Zealand who are aged between 3 and 5 who are in teacher-led services should be able to have 20 hours a week free. And that 20 hours is a maximum of 6 hours per day. So you could have, 3 days at 6 hours plus another little bit the next day. The way it works is you work with a centre to get registered for the 20 hours ECE subsidy. Most centres allow you to claim it through them. Some don't. So always really good to ask when you're looking at a centre, hey, do you guys do the 20 hours ECE subsidy? It's not income tested, so anyone can get it. It's not about whether or not you have, a limited income coming into family. It's more about we as a nation want to encourage children to start early learning prior to school because we know it results in better educational outcomes. So it's about how do we make that easier for parents to get their children into ECE. Look, that's probably the real quick snapshot of the 20 hours ECE. So that's for everyone who has a child aged 3, 4, or 5, no more than 20 hours a week, no more than 6 hours a day. Ask your centre if they do it. Most do. The next one, though, is called the Childcare subsidy. It's a nice and simple name. It's different than the 20 hours ECE subsidy. And this childcare subsidy can't be used for the same 20 hours if you're already claiming that through the 20 hours ECE. So, for example, if your child was attending a service for 30 hours a week, it could be used to subsidise those additional 10 hours on top of the 20 that you're already claiming. So, who's it for? Look, you might be eligible for the subsidy if you meet some of these criteria. So you have to be the main caregiver of your child, sorry. You have to be on a low or middle income. Now, what does low or middle income mean? It depends on how many children you have. We've got a little table on our blog that shows you. It's quite detailed. So best to refer to that. And the amount of subsidy that you get will depend on how much you and your partner earn and how many children of preschool age that you've got. So if you are not working and you're not studying or in training, the childcare subsidy will be for a maximum of 9 hours a week. But if you're in training, if you're working, if you're the main caregiver, you can claim up to 50 hours a week in care. So look, this one's a little bit more complex in terms of working out how much you're eligible for. You don't have to have a child that's 3, 4, or 5, but your child can be, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The best way to figure out if you're eligible or not, jump on our blog. We've got a link to the Ministry of Social Development where they've got a little guide as well, and it shows you if you're eligible or not. But basically the two key subsidies in New Zealand are 20 hours free ECE for 3 to 5-year-olds, and then the childcare subsidy for people of lower to middle income who meet certain criteria. Hopefully that helps. It's a really detailed thing, and yeah, check out our blog for more information.
Okay, cool, thank you. So I'm going to go to some of the questions that were submitted beforehand. So Kat asked, what are the different approaches or philosophies that centres can have, such as Montessori?
Yeah, look, there's a lot out there. Look, some of the key ones are there's Montessori, there's Steiner, there's Amelia Reggio. Look, there's a lot, and I wouldn't do justice by going into the specific details of each and telling you exactly what. So, for example, Montessori, to be an official Montessori centre, you actually have to have a qualified Montessori teacher. And right now there's, I think, only one place in New Zealand who does that qualification for teachers. A really cool resource, though, if you're interested in, Montessori, is Montessori Association of New Zealand. They've got an amazing informative website in terms of what their approach is, what makes it different. Yeah, look, I don't think I do it justice if I went into full detail just because it's so specific, but yeah.
Maybe a different question is, how do you find the right one for you? I mean, I found that overwhelming too, just all the different philosophies and, where can you work out which one is probably going to be, or which ones, maybe plural, are going to be more suited to you and your family?
Yeah, so what I would say is, it might be slightly controversial, but I'd say don't get too hung up specifically on a philosophy until you've been to a service. So take the philosophy as part of the overall offering, but go and visit these services. So go and visit 3 to 5 different childcare settings, walk around, feel the environment, feel the vibe. What's it like? So for example, a Montessori center you're going to walk into and you might feel, hey, this is very calm and it seems quite structured in terms of what the children are up to. And if that resonates with you, that this feels like the right place for my child, then that for me is going to be more important than purely a sort of philosophical approach to an education type. Same as if you walk into another center and, hey, look, doesn't feel as structured, but the kids feel like they're having a really good time. They're using natural materials. There's hammers and nails. It feels like sort of old school New Zealand, and that's what we're really into. Or, hey, we're going to this other one that has a bush kindergarten sort of feel to it, where they have a creek running through the back that the children go and play in the mud. They play outside in all weather, etc. And they just so happen to be a Reggio school. I would say go and feel what it's like in there. Go and talk to the teachers. Go and see how happy the children are, and go with what everyone feels right to you, rather than, hey, this is a pure philosophy of the centre.
Yeah, I like your approach, and I couldn't agree more that going to see it in person is kind of the way to get a really good feel for what's going to be right for you and your family. Another question we had is, what are the main differences between the top end and say a middle tier daycare? So what are you getting the more you pay, or are you getting more the more you pay?
Yeah, that's really fascinating, right? So look, I can only speak from personal experience. The centre that my children went to was an old converted house, so not architectural masterpiece. Old converted house. We thought it was fairly expensive. Only 20 children, so very, very small. And is expensive for the area that we're in it. And what did we get in terms of going to this one that was in demand and had a bit of a wait list and top? And I think for us, we got 100% qualified teachers. We got teachers who had been there for, I think, minimum of 15 years each. So massive stability. Yeah, and to be honest, that was probably the key things. It was that it cost more because they were paying more for fully qualified teachers who have been there a long time, right? We've got people in our office at Kindello, and most people will end up enrolling in a centre that's within 2 kilometres of the house or 2 kilometres of where they work. This is naturally what happens, and that's what we see on our platform. But one of our team drives far further than that to go to a specific centre, because that centre is part of a school network that he went to growing up. So he assigns the quality of that education, and they provide they're very expensive, but they provide regular updates. They're very, very, very customer service focused, really great updates for the child in terms of what they've done that day. A lot of one-to-one sort of really good ratios, really good equipment, all those sorts of things. So I think that's what you can expect at the sort of the higher end, is a really high level of customer service, probably more qualified teachers. On the sort of lower end in terms of cost, if you're going to something that's lower cost, you might have, some of the resources might be a bit older. The building might be a bit older. They may sometimes have less qualified teachers, because qualified teachers are more expensive than unqualified teachers. So that's probably what you can expect. In saying that, some of the coolest centres I've been to in terms of the community feel, the vibe, some of the coolest centre owners that I know are running not-for-profit centres that aren't charging people whatsoever. They fundraise to do other things. So yeah, look, it comes down to this whole thing again, right? Go and visit a centre. Go and see what it feels like. Maybe visit one that feels at a lower price point, and visit one at the higher price point and see if you can tell the difference. And if not, then go with whatever your gut tells you to go with.
Okay. Zelandia asks, what are some of the best questions to ask when you go visit a childcare option?
Yeah, so look, number one, going and visiting is really cool, and that's the most important thing. Is going to see these services. So what I'd say when you go to a service is really keep an open mind. Go on with an open mind and to see what it feels like. The questions I would be asking them is, what do you do to help my child transition into the centre? What does the settling routine look like? Do we do 1 to 3 settling visits when we first come on board? What does a day in the life of the centre look like? What's your ratio that you're running with? There's government mandated ratios in terms of how many teachers per child, but many centres are running at better ratios than that. So you want to ask, what's your ratio of adult to child? Ask about anything that's important to you, whether that's, hey, do you do any like structured outdoor activity type thing? Ask about, is it structured learning where you have times for specific things, or are you a child-led centre where the child's sort of inquisitive nature leads what you do? So just ask a bit about how the day goes. I think also coming back to what we discussed really early on, asking about some of those fees as well, right? Like, what's your holiday policy? What's your sickness policy? What happens if there is a lockdown? What happens if there is an outbreak within our centre of, gastro or whatever? So asking those things as well.
And we might have time for one more question. Is there anyone from the audience who would like to ask a question?
Hello. Oh, I'm over here, but I had you on the screen. Hi, Logan. I'm Vanessa. In your experience, how accommodating are, I guess specifically daycare? Well, hang on, maybe my question is in 2 parts. How common is it that you need to provide your own food at a daycare centre? And then second part to my question is, if you don't, how accommodating typically are centres for like common allergens? I guess like I'm thinking gluten and dairy.
Cool, thanks, Vanessa. So first part of the question was almost what percentage of centres are providing meals versus not. And honestly, now it's sitting somewhere around about 50% provide and 50% don't. Now, what I would sort of generically say is the newer centres with some of the sort of bigger brands. So behind me is New Shoots, Kindello, Best Start, most of those sort of bigger brands that you hear, most of them are providing food, and some of the food that they provide is amazing. So like, the New Shoots menu looks like something from a cafe, and it's like amazing healthy food that I would love. Like they should serve it, at Kindello, it'd be amazing. The smaller centres that are a little bit older tend not to, because they've often been built without commercial kitchens and without this sort of kitchen space as well, right? What we find is that centres are really, really good at being allergen sensitive, but also being trained as well. So for example, most centres, well, not most centres, a lot of centres will have a policy saying no peanuts, no peanut products, right? So nothing with, like our centres are the same. So nothing with it in the muesli bar, no peanut spreads, no nothing like that, because we had a child that was very, very sensitive to even peanut in the air. Most centres these days, though, are really accommodating in terms of food and understanding that, and as well, they're also well trained in terms of the use of EpiPens. So yeah, once again though, always ask. So in the initial sort of inquiry or at the visit, just asking what their policy is around this, how they support it. But yeah, look, we find it's getting better and better.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm just going to launch a feedback poll to give folks time to fill it out as we wrap up. I want to thank Logan very much for joining us today. You've shared so much wonderful knowledge. In fact, I wish that I had known a lot of this when I was looking for childcare for my daughter. So thank you very much, Logan, for giving up your time and also sharing your expertise over the decade plus that you've been in this industry. You're probably in quite a unique position in the sense that you've seen a lot of different options out there, and so you can really talk to what works or what doesn't work or what might suit certain families over others. So thank you so much for joining us today. If you can please provide feedback on the poll I've just launched, and I'll share that with Logan afterwards. And, since we've probably got a minute left, the last question I will ask you is, you mentioned the Kindello website a couple of times and what type of resources are on there. Is there anything else on there you haven't touched on that might help the parents on today's call?
Yeah, look, so Kindello will help you find the perfect early learning option for your whānau based on the things that matter to you. So search, find, compare, book visits, instantly chat with centres back and forward, read real reviews. That's all cool. But to find out more information about what you should be thinking about, jump onto our blog. There's some really cool articles there that help you with things like subsidies, the different types of early learning services, actually some really cool stories from people who are managers at ECE services as well. So jump on the blog. It's full of really cool information. And look, if you've got any questions, just sing out to us on Kindello. You'll see our email on there. And yeah, always happy to chat with anyone about anything specific. And thanks a lot for having us, Steph.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And perhaps one very sneaky last question is there anything you wish you had known as a parent earlier? Something that you might tell your younger self? This was a question from Natalie.
Yeah, definitely. So I was actually reflecting on this today, like what did I wish I knew back then? And look, it was ridiculous. We left it late to start looking at early learning options for my son when we first started. So I wish I knew to start earlier. I wish I knew that some early learning services only provide for 2-year-olds and older. So we ended up at Play Centre for a year and a half, waiting for a space to open up. I wish I knew that waitlists existed. So yeah, look, there's so much I wish I knew. The key thing was I wish I started earlier and just really looked at my options earlier on, because I think the more you know, the less guilt you feel because you feel like you're armed with the knowledge to make the right decision, right? So it's all about, hey, go out there, do your research, get yourself comfortable, and then, things are much better from there.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. We're right on time. I hope everyone has a great afternoon and appreciate you all sharing your lunchtime with us. Have a good day.
Good up.